The sun beat down relentlessly on the dusty roads of Galilee, a land where whispers of miracles had begun to travel faster than the desert wind. In the first century, the shores of the Sea of Galilee were teeming with people. They came from all walks of life: the blind, the lame, the destitute, and the curious. They were all seeking one man, Jesus of Nazareth. He was a carpenter turned rabbi, a teacher who spoke with an authority that left the religious elite astounded and the common people filled with an unprecedented sense of hope. To understand the magnitude of what was about to unfold, one must understand the crushing weight of the era. Illness was not just a physical burden, it was a spiritual and social exile. Those afflicted with chronic conditions were often viewed as cursed, cast out from the bustling life of the markets, the warmth of the synagogues, and the embrace of their own families. Yet, wherever Jesus walked, this oppressive darkness seemed to fracture. Today, our story centers not on a grand sermon delivered from a mountaintop, nor on a dramatic confrontation with the Pharisees. Instead, it is a quiet, desperate, and profoundly intimate moment hidden within a chaotic crowd. It is a testament to the fact that amidst a sea of thousands, divine grace can pinpoint a single, silent cry for help. This is the story of the touch of faith. It is a journey through 12 years of agony, culminating in a single second of profound, life-altering restoration.
In a modest stone dwelling in Capernaum lived a woman whose name history has gracefully surrendered to anonymity, allowing her to represent every soul in profound distress. For 12 agonizing years, she had suffered from a constant hemorrhage of blood. To modern ears, this is a severe medical condition requiring immediate care. To a first-century Jewish woman, it was a living death sentence. According to Levitical law, her bleeding rendered her ceremonially unclean. Everything she touched, her bed, her chair, the cups she drank from, became unclean. Anyone who embraced her would share in her impurity. Because of this, she was isolated. Friends stopped visiting. Family members had to keep their distance. She was not allowed to enter the temple to worship, effectively cutting her off from her community and her God. Over the course of a decade and a half, she had exhausted every resource she possessed. She had visited every physician in the region, enduring painful, bizarre, and ultimately useless treatments. The Gospel of Mark bluntly records that she had suffered a great deal under the care of many doctors and had spent all she had. Yet instead of getting better, she grew worse. She was bankrupt, entirely alone, and physically withered. The constant loss of blood would have left her severely anemic, chronically fatigued, and dizzy. Every step was a monumental effort. Every sunrise brought only the grim promise of another day of isolation. She was a ghost lingering in the margins of society, fading away in the shadows while the world outside her window moved on. Yet, beneath her fragile exterior, a resilient ember of willpower refused to be completely extinguished. The turning point came not with a grand revelation, but through the everyday chatter of the city streets. From the isolation of her doorway, she overheard travelers speaking of the Nazarene. They spoke of blind eyes opening to the light, of paralyzed limbs dancing in the dust, and of lepers returning with skin as smooth as a child's. At first, these stories might have seemed like cruel taunts to a woman whose hope had been repeatedly shattered by false promises of healing. But as the testimonies multiplied, the ember within her flared into a consuming fire. She heard that Jesus did not recoil from the broken. He touched the untouchable. A daring, dangerous thought took root in her mind. If she could just reach him, she wouldn't even need to speak. She wouldn't need to embarrass herself by publicly declaring her unclean ailment. She formed a silent, desperate creed in her heart. If I just touch his clothes, I will be healed. This plan was fraught with immense risk. To enter a dense crowd in her condition was a severe violation of social and religious law. If she brushed against people, she would be making them ceremonially unclean without their knowledge. If discovered, she could face severe public shaming, physical retaliation, or even be stoned. She was risking whatever tiny shred of dignity she had left. But desperation breeds an unparalleled kind of courage. Wrapping her shawl tightly over her head and face to conceal her identity, she stepped out of her self-imposed prison. She was weak, trembling, and terrified, but she was moving. She was walking toward the light.
Finding Jesus was not difficult. The commotion gave him away. However, reaching him seemed physically impossible. Jesus was surrounded by a massive, surging crowd. Adding to the urgency, a prominent synagogue leader named Jairus had just thrown himself at Jesus' feet, pleading for his dying 12-year-old daughter. Jesus was on the move toward Jairus' house, and the multitude pressed tightly around him, eager to witness another miracle. The woman joined the edge of the mob. The heat was stifling, the noise deafening. For a woman who was severely anemic and weak, navigating this crush of bodies was agonizing. Elbows struck her, sandals trampled her feet. She was shoved and pushed, nearly losing her balance countless times. With every step, her heart pounded against her ribs. She kept her head down, avoiding eye contact, silently praying she wouldn't be recognized. The physical toll was immense, her vision blurring at the edges as she expended the last reserves of her strength. Yet she kept her eyes fixed on the target, the fringes of Jesus' garment, the tzitzit, which swayed with his rhythmic stride. In Jewish tradition, these tassels represented the commandments and authority of God. For her, they represented a lifeline. She ducked under a merchant's arm, squeezed past a group of fishermen, and finally broke through the inner ring of the crowd. She was now directly behind him. The dust kicked up by his sandals coated her face. She reached out a trembling, pale hand, her fingers stretching past the protective barrier of his disciples. Just one touch. That was all she needed. Her fingertips brushed the rough, woven fabric of the tassels on the hem of his cloak. It was a fleeting, almost imperceptible contact. Yet in that fraction of a second, the universe shifted. She didn't just feel better. She felt entirely remade. The dull, persistent ache in her abdomen vanished instantly. The heavy lethargy in her limbs was replaced by a surge of vibrant, coursing energy. She knew, in the deepest core of her being, that the bleeding had stopped. The 12-year curse was broken. She quickly pulled her hand back, intending to slip away into the crowd, her mission accomplished in absolute secrecy. But Jesus abruptly stopped walking. The entire procession halted. Jesus turned around and asked a question that seemed absurd to everyone around him. Who touched my clothes? His disciples, particularly Peter, were baffled. Peter pointed to the crushing masses and said, "You see the people crowding against you, and yet you can ask, 'Who touched me?'" Dozens of people were bumping into him every minute. But Jesus knew the difference between the accidental bump of a curious bystander and the intentional, desperate reach of faith. He had felt healing power go out from him. He continued to look around the crowd, his eyes searching for the one who had drawn on his grace. The woman realized she could not go hidden. Terrified and trembling, fearing reprimand for her presumption and for making the rabbi ritually unclean, she stepped forward. She fell at his feet, the very dust of the road clinging to her tears, and she told him the whole truth. In front of the crowd, Jairus, and the disciples, she confessed her 12 years of shame and her instant healing.
The crowd held its collective breath, waiting for the rabbi's reaction. By the law, he had every right to be furious. She had interrupted an urgent mission to save a dying child and had transferred her ritual impurity to him. But as Jesus looked down at the trembling woman, his eyes held no condemnation, only an ocean of profound compassion. He did not scold her. He did not ask her for payment or penance. Instead, he offered her a word of profound endearment. "Daughter," he said gently,
his voice carrying clearly over the hushed crowd. "Your faith has healed you. Go in peace and be freed from your suffering." In that single sentence, Jesus did more than validate her physical healing. By calling her daughter, he restored her social and spiritual standing. He publicly declared her clean, acceptable, and deeply loved by God. She was no longer the anonymous outcast. She was a beloved child of the Creator. The story of the woman with the issue of blood echoes through the centuries as a profound testament to the nature of divine grace. It reminds us that God is never too busy for individual pain, even when the world's demands are urgent. It teaches us that faith does not require eloquent prayers or grand gestures. Sometimes it is simply the desperate courage to reach out in the dark. In a world full of noise and crowds, the quietest touch of faith can still stop the Savior in his tracks, transforming a lifetime of sorrow into an eternity of peace.